Welcome everyone to Cape Ann ARTWaves. I'm Christine Fisher, your host of today's program, coming to you by way of 1623 Studios located in Gloucester, Massachusetts. My fellow co-producer, Jacqueline Ganim-DeFalco, Jackie, and I want to thank our listeners. There are approximately 13,000 of you, and we are most grateful. We're also very grateful to our sponsors for their generous support. They are Prince Insurance Agency, M.K. Fisher, visual artist Martha K. Andrew of Compass Real Estate Brokerage, Protective Packaging, Cape Ann Savings Bank, and Coming Pro. We also want to thank our partner seARTS for doing such a terrific job with the marketing, and to 1623 Studios who broadcast and distribute our show. Our thanks extends to local musicians Steve Lacey and Pat Verga for their contribution of the original music. Cape Ann ARTWaves, as many of you know, is all about celebrating and learning from our greater community, artists and makers, gaining insight into their artistic journey and work. Today, I have a very special treat. We're going to be reversing roles. It is my pleasure to bring forward someone who deserves her moment, is well known as a Cape Ann champion, and who is celebrating her 20th year since launching Cape Ann Designs. A big welcome to Jacqueline Ganim-DeFalco. Jackie. Both Jackie and I are artists as well as co-producers of Cape Ann ARTWaves, and it's been our honor to interview and learn from over 70 artists. I'm actually wearing vintage Cape Ann Designs right here. Jacqueline began her wearable art journey in 2003 and displayed her work for the first time at the October 2004 Sea Glass Festival, which was hosted by seARTS in Rockport, Massachusetts. Inspired by her husband and their mutual passion for history and antique glass collecting, she set about to combine her business and creative skills and attempted to fill a niche focused on hair jewelry. Jacqueline's Cape Ann Designs creations expanded quickly to include a full array of hair accessories and jewelry created from her own sea glass collection. Her work appears prominently in the book, A Passion for Sea Glass by author Carole Lambert. It's a beautiful book, who launched the sea glass movement. Jackie then was juried into the Cape Ann Artisans Studio Tour in 2013 and has been active ever since. And many of you know her from the tour. Former chair of seARTS, she is the founder of the seARTS Wearable Arts Group in 2006. The community holiday shows led to the launch of Celebrate Wearable Art 2011 to 2017. Jackie wears another hat, marketing for other organizations, a fellow hybrid, and is now, of course, co-producing Cape Ann ARTWaves. In 2018, she received the Discover Gloucester Arts and Cultural Heritage Award, a big deal. During the pandemic, she displayed work at the Rocky Neck Art Colony show Exuberance, I love that title, and created a partner show at the Jane Deering Gallery titled A Line in the Sand with fellow artist Leslie Heffron. In addition to selling her work in Boston area galleries, her work is sold at the Fuller Craft Museum, Naples Art, Tatter Studio and Gallery in St. Augustine, and select galleries in and around Boston. Jackie has also participated at specialty events on behalf of nonprofits, which really speaks to her generosity. Welcome again, Jackie.
Well, thank you, Christine, and I really appreciate it.
Of course, of course.
You kind of forget these things until you have a chance to really review your past. I don't know where the last 20 years went. Anyway.
Well, let's get started. We have a lot to cover. You have a big story here that we want to be sure to do due diligence. I want to first ask you the question: how and why did you start making sea glass jewelry? And just as importantly, how did you gain confidence as an artist? That's a big one.
Yes, that is a big one. I have to say, you did a pretty good job articulating, how I got started. I mean, I think there were a couple of key inflection points. One was just collecting glass. So the first photo I want to show today is really in my studio of my glass collection. And the one thing I have to say about that is that over the last 10 years of the Cape Ann Open Studio Tours, every single person that walks in asks one question. So I want to get it out of the way early. Where do you find your sea glass? And so, so my answer to that question is that you're asking the wrong question. It's not where I find it, it's when you find it. And, it's strictly been off season, and it's strictly been in unusual places in the working harbor front, not on the ocean. And probably the coldest, nastiest, stormiest, days that nobody actually wants to be on the beach. So there you go.
That.
I just like to get that out of the way early.
Well, we should also mention, Jackie, before we go further, that you are in your studio right now.
I am in my studio. Absolutely. I have this incredible display behind me that my husband and I made together. So that's a good place to pick up from. Again, you mentioned my husband, Michael. Of course, he restores historic buildings. And so a lot of the things that I use, I pick up from his finds and things that people are getting rid of, and we reuse them. And he and I were collecting sea glass, and that's where this started. Being extremely practical person that I am, I wasn't just going to have a collection. And I didn't need any more hobbies. And so I've got plenty of those. And so I wanted to do something interesting, functional, and artistic with the glass, and really return to a creative side I had left behind a long time ago. And I focused on hair accessories. As you know, initially, I called this little business that I started Beach Glass Barrettes initially, and started to test the waters at the Sea Glass Festival that you kindly mentioned. Some really ambitious people put that together such a long time ago, and they actually started a movement. And so people that were behind it some of them are still around, and I credit them for that. It's there that I met Carole Lambert from the Sea Glass Chronicles and Passion for Sea Glass and all her other incredible writing. So that gave me a chance to test the market, so to speak, right here in Rockport. And then I continued to do that. And I got a little braver in around 2005. I was walking through New York City, my old hometown. And I said, I think I'll drop a postcard off at this beautiful shop and see if they want me to do some wedding accessories. And so that's another photograph that I'm going to show here, my very first postcard. And the funny thing is I had no expectations. I just thought I have nothing to lose. I wrote a little note to the proprietor, Jane Wilson Marquine, said, I'd love to make accessories for your bridal store. And lo and behold, 2 or 3 weeks later, I got a note from her in the mail, and she said, sure, send me some work. And that was the beginning, because to be associated with a couture designer in New York was very exciting.
Absolutely. And she's been a friend ever since, right?
She has been. We even had her in the Wearable Art Show.
I was going to say, wasn't she a participant in the Runway show? And Jackie, we have to note that you are wearing your beautiful jewelry, and that's kind of another signature move of yours. You're always donned in your beautiful jewelry, and you've created a lot of buzz by doing that as well. Don't you agree?
It has been a lot of fun to wear it. And I was going to bring up a little bit later, but wearing it like year round all the time. Yes. It's not just a summer thing, right?
Right. I want to know, how did you land and find your sense of style, particularly in your space, distinguishing yourself from others in your genre?
It was, that's quite a journey. I think I was very intimidating at first, because there were many sea glass jewelers even 20 years ago, very, very accomplished, especially technically accomplished jewelers. And I feel like a lot of them just maybe started down the path of sea glass, didn't necessarily stay there. But I did feel I had a good sense of fashion, a good sense of color, and a sort of innate sense of design that I wanted to explore. And so I think the key for me was to get I'll call them my sea glass legs, right? And I had to start with something that I felt really comfortable with. And so that's why I just went right into the hair accessories. It was just a niche that nobody really cared about, honestly. And I thought if I could just test the sense of design, and I went right out and started to try to sell them in downtown Gloucester, and they immediately sold at a small shop that I put them in. And I grabbed them all back and said, okay, I've got to do more of this. And I did start basically knocking on doors and getting the work out there early, just initially the hair accessories. Mari actually was a wonderful beginning for me. The fact that she wanted to have my work in her beautiful store in Manchester. So that gave me a little bit of confidence, but I also realized I had to continue to distinguish the actual designs. And one of the ways that I have done that from the beginning, and it's sort of a trademark now, is getting the glass and the pottery to work together and stay together and play off of each other. And that's kind of become a symbol that this is my work, you know, and as opposed to trying to put all these, you know, other things together, I really want the glass and the pottery to play off of each other. And the more that I was able to do that, then the more that the work became my work. And I'm going to show some photographs of the evolution of this, because there's a lot of ways to do this, right? So first there's sort of the puzzle design and, you know, just sort of playing with things and making them work together. Then I started layering, you know, glass and pottery. I added a lot more wire. Again, the wire really helps both functionally and actually also brings out some of the designs. And then I started experimenting with more materials. You know, how else can I make the sea glass wearable in more situations, right? And so that's where I've added the leather. So those
and I think also to your point earlier, pushing your use of materials so that your collectors can really take advantage of wearing these beautiful pieces all year round, right?
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, that really does help to distinguish you, I feel, in the space.
Each year, I have to start to think about some new way to put things together that will really create a sense that these things belong together and that there's also something new to look forward to. And I had to learn that. I mean, that was just by looking at other designers, following other designers, being in all the shows.
Right, exactly. And hearing your collectors' feedback. I particularly like how you have pushed yourself working with a diversity of materials. I mean, just look at the piece that you're wearing right now.
Yes, this one's been really fun, and it has some of your DNA in it, Christine. Because this was this started with this beautiful chain that you said you want. We sat on the beach, and you had all this old jewelry to get rid of,
right?
And other people as well. And I said, how can I repurpose this and reuse it? And it all came together in the purse pendant collection. So.
Well, it works really beautifully with your piece. So let's continue to move on, Jackie. What types of influences have shown up in your work and why?
Well, I think, you know, it's a very sort of simple thought, but the most important thing is the actual glass and pottery itself, the shapes, the size, and the weight. And by way of an example of what you cannot do with sea glass, somebody gave me a hat made of sea glass. And it's so heavy that as soon as you put it on your head, you get a headache, right? So it's very heavy. It can be very heavy. And there's so many people that could never wear that, right? So there's this, you know, there's constant juggling of these shapes and sizes to make something that people can actually wear. And so I have to work with that. And you can see, I'm going to show a quick process photo of kind of, you know, how things continually move around in my workspace. And it literally is just like a puzzle. So, you know, we move things around, we stack them, we change the balance on them until we come across, you know, something that just feels right. And that's your sense of design. I don't know that you can learn that. I think you have to have some of it innate. You know,
I agree. I also think you have to have the patience, right? You need to have some patience to really play with the different shapes and the different ways that the materials relate to each other. I mean, it's an artistic process is what it is.
And I think in the end, there's also some things that enter into your design that you don't even realize. And so at one point, somebody actually pointed out to me, oh my, these look, you know, your barrettes, they look like butterflies or they look like fans. And I said, you know, that's so funny because I spent at least 4 years living and working in Asia in my last career. And those are such Asian symbols. And so now it's much more conscious. And I'm going to, you know, show some photographs of a green brooch and also a collection that really I think you can, now that you're looking for it, you might see those butterflies and those fans showing up.
Mhm.
And I think the final thing for me is that growing up, I always had a set, when you play with all these things in your art classes,
Mhm.
I always like to stack and build things.
Mhm.
And so there's definitely a sculptural architectural side to what I do. There's no question. And sometimes when I enter shows and there's no other category, I'll just throw it into sculpture. What the heck? And
Well,
see what happens.
your work is undeniably very 3D. I mean, I think you're absolutely right.
But
So
thank you. Yeah, thank you for that endorsement. I mean, it's, I think I could eventually, do things other than wearable art, but right now I'm enjoying it. I'm enjoying continuing.
you're having too good a time.
Yeah, exactly.
You're having too good a time. Let's talk a little bit more. I want to ask you the question, do you have a particular preference of color relationships that in particular you like to work with?
Well, I happen to live with an expert color person.
You
So
do.
if I pick the wrong combination,
I'm going to let you know.
I find out pretty quickly. But I have to say, what's been really fun is to take the, I would say, the underappreciated colors of sea glass, like you're wearing, the browns, the deep greens. The people will quickly say, well, that was a beer bottle or that was a wine bottle. They turn out to be some of the most elegant and distinguishing pieces.
Well, I love the boldness of this.
Yes, yeah, exactly.
And these are colors that perhaps other people might overlook, but I think they're quite distinguishing.
And I think people walk in, expect to buy blue. Everybody loves blue. They know it's the rarest color, but blue is really hard to work with. And actually red, which is really rare, is really hard to work with because there aren't so many great other colors that want to go with it.
Yeah.
And it's also, you can, not everybody can wear blue. So you really have to have something for everyone.
Right, exactly right. All right, we're going to keep pushing forward, Jackie. How have you grown in terms of your presence as an artist? And talk to us about your biggest moment.
It's really interesting to think about this, Christine, and I'm glad I had some time to think about it because it's really two ways you grow as an artist. And you grow in terms of the work and your designs, and then you have to grow in terms of getting your work out there. And I don't know that everybody can actually look at things that way, but I had to because of my background in business, right? So I think in terms of the design, I have depended a lot on feedback, starting with my friends who are all very creative anyway, and also some of them just totally appreciating creativity. Very quickly, I was able to get things sort of in and out of the collections, right? Something that wasn't going to work or somebody suggested something and I try it. If it didn't sell, then it's out, right? I don't want it sitting in here. I want it out there. But also just the way people react. And that is why it was really fun to have be in shows and have a studio tour because you get that feedback. So that's number one. I love getting the feedback. Eventually, though, and I mentioned this earlier, I realized that I would be, if I wanted to be on this path for 20 years, who knew, that I needed to introduce a new collection every year. So I'm going to kind of show these. First, called the Runway Collection. That was one of the first things I learned when I started doing Celebrate Wearable Art was, wow, if you want to look at something on a runway, it better be big and bold because otherwise nobody's going to see it, right?
That's right. Yeah.
So that was one of my early ways of showing collections. Then it really became for me a question of what can I do with all these crazy, unusual pieces that I found? And I, for years, looked at my bottlenecks, which are the rarest forms of sea glass. And yet I just couldn't figure out how to make them interesting until I realized I could use them vertically with a beautiful handmade bead from Beth Williams, add, the wiring and the vintage chains, and the bottleneck beauty collection came out. And then the purse pendants, the ones I talked about earlier, again, these huge, unusual shapes, they're very hard to work with. You can't really drill them, So how do I put these together, assemble these together? They're really like assemblages. So that was yet another collection. And these collections now each year are continuing to come up. I could go on forever on that, but I want to switch over to how you expand your presence, because,
Mhm.
you know, part of doing ARTWaves, I think for us has also been to help other artists come forward. And I can't put enough emphasis on the importance of getting to know your customers, keeping track of your customers, building your email lists, website, social media presence, and just touching base with people. It's just so important. And then when you get the PR and the marketing, using it well, sharing it. So that's like a little bit of a 30-second spot, because that's my life, right? That's what I've done my whole life. So I think I have to emphasize that I used that for myself. That's the ultimate test, right?
Sure.
I think, and then getting out of your comfort zone, with galleries, for me, that's a big deal to go sell my stuff to a gallery, walk in. Beth Williams and I wrote a blog post earlier this year about exactly how you should approach galleries, so I won't go into that. But that's another learning experience, and getting off Cape Ann, out of Boston, anywhere you're traveling. And so that's what I've done. And I think for me, that's been a huge, leap forward in terms of customer base. And then having, people in Florida or, all these other climates contact me. I think in terms of, there are two probably really important things that have happened. One being now going into my 10th year with the Cape Ann Artisans, I think has been fabulous. I love the interaction in the studio with people. It's a continual endorsement of, the work. And then finally, back in 2019, being invited to be part of the holiday event at the MFA was huge. Just to be chosen out of 18 people for the whole state to sell my work in the big atrium there. That was very exciting. So, you have to have those moments.
That was your good moment. I love it. I love it. Let's talk more about what you have learned from your patrons, from your collectors, while we're kind of on this topic.
I think you have to continually evolve, and people expect that. You just can't, I just can't hide in my studio and do, I would just make barrettes. I love making barrettes, and I could have done just that. But I think people expect to see new work. And so they also like to hold on to the old work. And that's also very interesting. I have
case in point right here.
Exactly. But I have my shop in Rockport, and they have enjoyed the same type of pieces over, 15 years at least, right? That's what they want, and that's great. And you have to respect that as well.
Of course.
Right? Relationships are huge. I think because basically in the end, anybody can copy our work as artists. I mean, that's just a reality, but you cannot duplicate a relationship. And so if you really pay attention to the small things, if you're, for me, it's been being super responsive to people. Oh my God, if something breaks, which you don't want that to happen, but it can happen. Or if, they need something quickly because they're going to a big event. And I mean, these are basic kind of customer service things, but if you focus on those little things, it helps people get through, the mistakes that you make along the way,
Sure. Yeah.
And we know this from business, right? It's
right. Well said.
So that's my second lesson. I think the third thing, and this is the one that's probably my heart and soul has gone into, is community. And, it's two ways, this world is bilateral. And since I moved here, I had the privilege of investing in Cape Ann, everything from my work with the YMCA to my work with seARTS, and now with Cape Ann ARTWaves. And I get pulled into all kinds of things, as the Artisans were volunteers, and I try to help wherever I can, donate my work when I, can. And I think I never really thought about it. I mean, I just felt it was the right thing to do. And to share my expertise. And then, now years later, people come into my studio and, they kind of know me from all these different, places, or they'll call me and they'll thank me. And I never expected that, but it's a beautiful thing to do. And I would encourage every artist to invest in the community the best way they can, even if it's not financially, So
I think that's fabulous advice. I really do. I really do. So let's talk about seARTS Wearable Art. Having been on the ground floor of that initiative, what was your motivation and what did you learn? Share with us.
Well, it's really
dedicated.
Well, thank you. And as somebody who was part of it yourself, you know how exciting it was to see the whole thing evolve, right?
That's right. Yeah.
I think the idea first came from, how do we get jewelry artists together before it even became wearable art? How do we talk about jewelry? Because we all love jewelry. And so we started with a salon and talking about it. And then I realized there were so many jewelers in this area, right? How do we do something together? And so when I asked people, they said, we want to sell together. We want to have a show. So we started with the Pleasant Street Tea Company. We then moved it to the library. I got a little out of sequence there. And then we sold, and we got the community together in a really exciting way, where we all of a sudden in a weekend, we were able to sell anywhere from $6,000 to $10,000 worth of jewelry just in our little community. But when I looked around at we also expanded at that point beyond jewelry. We realized that there was this other thing called wearable art, that there was, hand painted silk and purses and other things that people were making, handmade, one of a kind. And, there really isn't a place for wearable art anywhere. It sort of falls between the cracks of, it could be costume or fashion or whatever. And I just saw this opportunity, as you did as well, as a few other key people along the way thought, how do we leverage this little niche? How do we take it forward? But there was kind of this aha moment when I looked at the numbers, that you could only sell to a certain point in that kind of free, open community show. And people were only willing to spend a certain amount. So anyway, I think the bottom line was we needed to raise the bar somehow. And so we had to educate, which we were lucky enough to do through some events at the Cape Ann Museum. And finally, we had to have the sizzle to sell the steak, so to speak. And with learning from what happened in New Zealand with the world of wearable art, and looking at one or two other examples around the world or the country, we thought, what, we really need an event that's alive, where people get excited about this idea of handmade, one of a kind, maybe go a little over the top with it to create that sizzle. And voila, we had Celebrate Wearable Art. And on so many levels, that was just an incredible journey for everybody involved.
Well, it was so well received. I mean, we had 250 folks in our audience, right?
Right. Paying a significant amount of money to be there.
Paying quite a bit of money to be there and to enjoy such a spectacular, unique, one-of-a-kind event.
And brought forward many artists. And by the way, the price point of selling went from $100 on average to like $500 or $600 on average, right? So now you're really starting to be able to sell.
And some spectacular jurors,
Yes.
MFA from the Peabody Essex Museum. I mean,
right. The Mass Art, we used to collaborate.
Stay on that topic.
I know, we could spend hours.
We can stay on that topic. All righty. Jackie, you have a lot of spinning plates. Let's talk about what's next.
What's literally next is coming up in October 8th and 9th, and that would be the Cape Ann Artisans Tour. I'm going to flash up all the details. And, it's definitely for those that have come year after year, they always find something new. And then for those people that have never done it or think, oh, that's not for me, please come. I think personally and creatively, I go back to basics, look at my collection and see what haven't I used, what's calling to me. I'm looking at my jars as I speak that I need to work with. And that will take me some time because I have a lot of other things going on right now. So I have to actually figure out that piece. I might have to get inspired by the theme of a show. And, it's interesting because the theme of one of the local shows recently was H2O. And it's probably interesting. I did not get into that show, but in order to get in, I had to come up with a completely new collection. And so the Anchor collection was born. So I'm going to show some of those photos.
I love it.
So you never know when you're going to get inspiration or what's going to happen, right?
That's right. That's right. And keeping an open mind, and you're absolutely right.
And I do want to add to that a custom work is also very inspirational. You know, people often come to me with things from their own collection that they want to do something with. And that's always a huge challenge, a creative challenge, and that's a lot of fun. And then I think, because we were talking about wearable art, I always get the question, will there be another wearable art show? And I think there will be, but not until after the 400.
Well said. Well, that answers a big question right there.
Yeah, exactly.
In terms of what you're thinking. All righty, Miss Jackie, as we wrap up here, where can we reach you?
Well, the first thing I always encourage people to do is join my email list, because that's where everything starts, and I try not to abuse it. Then people can always call me. I still have a home phone number that works. And through my website, Facebook, I don't really do Facebook Messenger so much, but it's a good way to know what's going on. And Instagram is another way. And I have a Flickr page. I'm going to put all this up. And of course, to pop over for the Cape Ann Artisans tour.
Well, I think you make yourself very accessible. And I think that's, really part of your success.
Well, thank you, Christine.
It has been so much fun to have this conversation with you. Thank you so much. Your story today has certainly elevated and enhanced my understanding of your work. So I'm very grateful and can't wait to see what's next.
You were one of my very, very first customers. So
That's right. That's right. I remember sitting at Sugar Magnolias over lunch and reviewing your work. It's great that we have those memories. So Jackie, I want to thank you. I want to thank our sponsors. I want to thank our listeners. I want to thank Anders Johnson for doing such a brilliant job supporting our videos and making us all look great. And for those who would like to catch up with Jackie's video, we're posting a screen that identifies all the places that you can look to catch her video in the future. So many thanks again, Jackie. Great fun.
Thank you, Christine.